Good morning. This is Kenneth and Heather with the Advancing Equity Coalition, here to give you our debrief of last night's school board meeting, to dive a little deeper past what we discussed in our recap, to let you know what are some of the specifics that we think you should be paying attention to when looking at this literacy framework. So before we get started, Heather, how are you doing?
Great, thank you.
Awesome. So yeah, let's dig into it. So last night we heard our fifth literacy presentation, I think, in the last 6 months, maybe four. I'm not sure, but either way, it's been a handful. Um, and I would say that I don't know. I learned anything new. I don't know if we did anything different. So let's start there. Um, I I'm not sure what we were supposed to completely get out of last night's presentation. I'm not sure what the board was supposed to get out of last night's presentation, and I'm not sure that the board knew that they're what they were supposed to get out of last night's presentation, because I don't feel like they're necessarily asking a ton of questions that were um, helpful or leading or giving a lot of feedback. Um, so yeah, I don't know. I thought that was frustrating to see a little bit last night. What about you?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I clearly, you and I watch these board meetings pretty closely. We watch them, and I remember being promised a plan.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
so to now get here, and I feel like it's like, oh no, it was always just going to be a framework. I'm like, I don't think so. I think this was supposed to be a plan. And now it took all this time to go from to make a framework, and now we're apparently going to make the rest of the plan in the next couple of months over the summer. Um, I have some real concerns about whether or not the framework identifies a problem and really talks about what we're solving for.
Yep.
Um, I think it's a great set of value statements. I think if we, I if I were thinking of this as a value statement presentation, I think it would have been excellent. You know, Unfortunately, we need to know how we're going to live our values, and that's where I think we saw nothing. And then I don't know, what did you think about the special education part of this conversation? I have some parents who live this world, and were kind of messaging me and really helping me see where they felt like it fell short. But
Yeah.
what did you think?
Well, I think there are a couple of things. I think the first thing, just going back a little bit, is like, yeah, I don't know if we learned like what problem this is going to solve or what we're doing differently. What is this going to address? And so then looking at the special education slide, I thought it was really frustrating to not see and again, since let's try to use framework if that's what they want to frame this as, and where I still think this framework comes up short. I think looking at the special education framework, like there should be goals around making sure that students receiving special education services like are still in some of our general education classrooms. Like we need to see that holistically. We need to see things like special education students reaching their goals that are being set out in their IEPs, and also making sure that those goals are are um, are rigorous goals, right? And like we still see the full potential and full brilliance of students receiving special education services. And I think that's been like a thing that I've consistently heard from folks around what are some of the concerns that we're seeing in special education. I do know there was a reference last night in special education around some of the um, racial predictability around who's being identified for special education. And I hope that I want to see the plan on that, because that's been something. I mean, all of this has been stuff that we've been talking about for years. And as much as people want to say, like, and the district wants to say, like, oh, we've been talking about this for a year, and oh, this has been a concern, and we're learning and learning more. Like, this should have been taken care of. There have been board members who've had to deal with this issue and should have been looking at this issue for a long time that are still sitting on our board. And I guess that's where the frustration comes in, is like, this is where we were at last night, right? After years and years and years of just admiring and staring at the problem. But even last night, we didn't acknowledge what the problem was. We don't know why the problem is happening. And so I don't know what this framework is addressing to ensure that we get closer to solving this problem. So I think that was some of my frustration, but that was specifically to your question. That's what stood out in special education to me.
Yeah, and what do you think about the ELL part of the plan? I mean, I found myself really thinking about that part. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there. I mean, I just think there are some opportunities, and I mentioned in the recap. I was listening to the meeting with my mother-in-law, and she was saying like, yeah, I think there's like a real opportunity for the district to say like, you're going to be fluently literate in both languages, like your home language and in English. And I think there's an opportunity to name that in the literacy framework. I think there was also a real opportunity. Again, I've heard time and time again from students and from parents who feel like they can't, once they have that ELL designation, they cannot get out of uh,
Yes.
the ELL program, which, I think, we don't want to say that the ELL program is bad and that general education is better, but I think they're feeling like they're being denied different opportunities to engage in like a full, well-rounded education, like, MPS promises and MPS says they want to have. And so I didn't see that literacy. I didn't see that outlined in the ELL section either. And so I think there's just real missed opportunities overall looking at the plan when talking about like goals, right? Like what are we trying to achieve? And I know what we want. We saw in the mission, we highlighted the mission and the vision in our recap video, but we know that it says like a lot of the stuff that we want students to engage in terms of like how they feel about literacy and how they feel how literacy impacts them. And that's important. And I think on a one-to-one individual basis, like that's really, really important. And also like how many students in our community are you going to help now become literate so that we can not just have one individual student engage in literacy, um, and just a handful of students engage in literacy, but what's the plan to ensure that a majority, if not all of our students are literate, right? And are experiencing that joy, going through identity development through literacy, right? Like all the things that I think were really important. It just didn't feel like there was a priority in getting a mass number of students literate. Um, and that felt missing to me. What
Yeah,
about you?
well, I mean, I think the other thing that the other like concern that I had was this issue of timing. One thing that I heard was the superintendent kind of applauding his team and saying, when we moved here, there was no literacy plan. And so in the last 5 years, we've acquired a literacy plan and done professional development on it. We also know from the data that lots of our teachers aren't using his literacy curriculum, and that there's massive inconsistencies on how the literacy curriculum is used, and that took 5 years. So in my head, when I think of that, I think, okay, I understand that change takes time. That's also an entire group of kindergarten or kiddos going from kindergarten through fourth grade. So that means is that, for students of color, they missed their window to read and write at grade level in the city. And then what I heard last night was that this framework, switching to a plan eventually, will also take 3 to 5 years.
Yeah.
So we know now that we are basically saying for the kids who are in kindergarten right now, this next phase of development, because we were told this takes time, that basically we can know that kiddos coming into kindergarten this year are not going to see the results of this before fourth grade.
Yeah. And
And we
I,
don't know how many of them we could get through this. We don't have a number.
right. I think that's really hard to swallow, right? Like that's the pill that I think everyone needs to be coming back to is like we have already failed, so many students when it comes to literacy, right? And we're setting ourselves up to, we need to create a plan, we need to develop a thing, and in the meantime, we're gonna just continue to fail another, class group of students. And yeah, I think some of the different individuals on the board during the discussion last night, and some of the staff were. It just didn't. I didn't sense the urgency. I did not sense urgency, and I think it's different when obviously it's your child who is not going to be reading as a result of MPS's lack of support in helping students how to read and making sure that everyone there is a plan, and teachers have the professional development necessary, and there is accountability, there are goals, there are structures of support. So I just thought that was really important. And something else that I've heard in all the literacy advocacy that's taken place up until this point also is, we keep hearing a lot about so many students. This is the plan once a student falls behind. Like, here are the interventions, yada yada yada, which are important. Like, we need to have a plan. I'm not like trying to glaze over that, but like, what is the plan to ensure not as many students need the interventions in the first place, right? Like, we keep zooming in on like once students fall behind, as if the assumption is like students are going to be behind, but there has to be a plan around, like, we need to do a better job on the front end, making sure not as many students need interventions. So then our intervention work isn't so spread thin, and we can really zoom in on the students and the skill development that they need to take place in the first place. And I think that's really important. And again, part of the conversation that I have, like, that should have been a priority. I just feel like that's really difficult and hard to not hear. Like, what are we going to do to ensure that our students don't fall behind so that we don't need to intervene, stop them from falling behind further? So yeah.
Yeah, then I think the other theme that we have to name is that this entire presentation and a lot of the responses from the superintendent were very jargon heavy, and I just I think that I think that our city can handle a cleaner conversation around literacy. I think as a parent who's experienced many parent teacher conferences within our district, our parent teacher conferences feel just as jargon heavy as what last night's board meeting feels. And when you walk away from a parent teacher conference, you have a folder full of the exact same sorts of loopy charts and graphs that and then some samples of your child's best work. But what you don't have is a really clear sense of, like, is my kid behind? Is my kid behind? Is he reading and writing at grade level? What does this mean? And if you don't understand that, then you don't know how to request more or demand more from your school or your teacher or your superintendent. And so I just have to name that as a parent, last night listening, I have an elementary education degree, although it's old. I didn't appreciate being told that some of the things that they were talking about were too technical. Too technical. I mean, like, then make it less technical. This is a public meeting.
It must be something about the mother vibes, because again, listening to this last night with my mother-in-law, she was saying the same thing. She was like, what is all this? Like, they're just using, flashy words and whatever to distract. Like, what does any of this mean? And so she was harping on the same point too. And it's an important point, because I think sometimes we feel like as experts, we need to use all the fancy words and the, whatever. But I think, and actually what my mom has always taught me is if you're an expert, you can explain something in a way that somebody else can understand it.
That's right.
And, it's my sense and my feeling that because the district uses such, jargony language, or the flashy terms and whatever, the board shrinks. Like, the board shrinks then and doesn't feel like they can engage. So that's similar to your point around like the relationship in a parent teacher conference, like that, this is it, right? Like the board are the parents, the district is the teacher, and the board will leave the meeting being like, so is my kid behind? I'm not sure. I don't even know what questions to ask because of this. Like that's exactly what's happening. And so, yeah, I think the question that everyone would leave with after last night's presentation is like, is Minneapolis behind? Are we not? Are we doing the right things, or are we not doing the right things? Because the district didn't say what's wrong and what's not working, and it wasn't clear whether or not how much of this has changed from what our original approach to literacy was, and or our approach before this was. And so I think that's a really profound point, Heather, like around thinking about this in terms of what's the conversation between teachers and parents. Like I also see the same similar dynamics that you're describing between the board and the district when it comes to almost any academic conversation, but especially all these literacy conversations we've been having over the last few months. I'm seeing the exact same kind of thing play out.
And I think it's interesting. We really want community engagement in our city, right? But one of the things that I learned early on was that, like, you will always feel too inexperienced to talk unless you just start talking, right? But also, our district has a responsibility to meet parents where they are. So you cannot continue to have board meetings where you jargon us and then have parent teacher conferences where all we receive is jargon. But then you want to have a Tuesday night site council meeting where you want our input. Like, the goal should have been for last night's meeting for me to leave with a deeper understanding of what my children are going to experience that is going to help them learn their letter names and sounds if I'm a kindergarten mom. Um, oh, and I would want to walk away from last night's meeting with a deep sense of I know how I can communicate with my child and my child's teacher. What we got was a superintendent telling us that the things that he's talking about are too technical for us to understand. And that's not courageous leadership.
Yeah. So, you know, I I just think it was really hard, disheartening, I should say. I think the conversation hasn't evolved this year at all.
Nope.
And I do think it is disappointing, like you had mentioned earlier on, that we were promised a plan and then it kind of felt like we lowered the bar to call it a framework so that there wasn't as much um, criticism or feedback if we weren't there yet or whatever. And so it felt like we paired it back to a framework. And I want to give um, interim senior academic officer Fearing, the benefit of the doubt here. Because I will say, and she said it a couple of times, like it's hard when you're trying to include people all the way through the process and people expect a finished product, but your whole point is to engage people in developing that finished product, not to just give feedback on the finished product. And so I do want to give her the benefit of the doubt here and say, like, that is what we ask for when we talk about community engagement. We don't only want to be included at the end stage and to tell you all whether we like it or we don't like it. We want to be included. We want, families, students, parents, teachers all want to be included all throughout, but that also needs to happen authentically and intentionally. And again, from the conversations we've had with different stakeholders, hasn't felt like it really has happened in that way. We know that teachers were presented this plan like a few hours before the board was presented this framework last night, right? And so it wasn't like that helped informed what the board then saw.
That's right.
It's just kind of like, we talked to the district parent advisory council, we talked to teachers, we talked to students, check, 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 and then they can say, like, these are the people that we've engaged with. But we know that we've talked to so many people and they've all been highly critical of what they've seen, and the board just got the same presentation. So what's the point of then engaging anybody if you're not going to actually incorporate their feedback and listen to what they have to say? And so I do, like I said, I do want to acknowledge that is a challenge in trying to get people to weigh in, but also at the same time you have to do it in a way that is authentic and real. And I don't know if that's happening all the way throughout. And I will say that I know that there have also been teachers that have weighed in on the different parts of the literacy framework. Like there have been, I think, a small group of teachers who have helped shape different sections of it and helped inform it. But still, I think we have to talk about engagement a little bit differently, and we need to talk about what are our expectations when you outline or yeah, you roll out something like this. Like you said in our recap, Senior Officer Moore really often has things rooted in like, here's where we're going, here's what's broken, here's what we're doing about it, and like maybe we're spoiled with that framework, but like I think that's what like that feels like a really authentic and a really good way to help people engage in the conversation and participate, and you don't see board members shrink. We see senior officer Giap do the same thing, like here's where we were last year, here's our process, here's what we're hoping to accomplish, what are your thoughts, right?
Yeah.
So I think it would be great if we could do academics in the same way, especially when we know the board is shrinking from this conversation a little bit.
Yep.
So
Yep.
anyways, that's our take on last night. Let us know what you thought about last night. We're really interested. I know people were kind of chiming in on Heather's Facebook feed last night, but we'd love to hear what you thought. Love your feedback on our take on everything. But thank you for listening. I appreciate it.
Bye.
Bye.